ahead and get started. Welcome to our October webinar on the top 3 reasons to implement an on-prem and Azure hybrid identity solution. My name is Steve Kruger. I am the president of Oxford US, and I'm here to do a brief intro to introduce Frank, our speaker today, and to tell you a little bit about some of our upcoming training sessions. Joining is Frank Drewes, who's the senior identity architect here at Oxford. He's been building identity solutions for us, starting with Microsoft's ILM product and then going into FIM. We've done over 900 identity engagements in the past few years, and Frank's been on a large number of them. Frank started working with the Azure Active Directory and on-prem synchronization tools pretty much from the get-go, and now spends the majority of his time designing and implementing hybrid identity solutions for our enterprise partners. His talk today is a reflection of a lot of what he's learned about those engagements and the business value our clients have benefited from. He's parsed that down to the top 3 reasons people like to implement a hybrid solution. And Frank, of course, does a lot of things when he's not busy integrating on-prem and cloud identity systems. Frank goes on really long bike rides and triathlons to raise money for his favorite charities, like the American Diabetes Association. So we'll let Frank get started here in a couple minutes, but Frank, if you could advance to the next slide, we will do a quick intro of Oxford for those of you that are not familiar with us. Thank you. So we've been working with identity and access management for 15 years, pretty much since Microsoft got in the business themselves. We've been Partner of the Year 6 times. We've gotten Partner of the Year 3 years running, most recently in 2015 for the Enterprise Mobility Partner of the Year. And we've trained, one thing that people don't know about us is we do a lot of training as well. We train online and in the classroom. We've trained over 6,000 students on Microsoft technologies. Go ahead and move to the next slide, Frank, if you would, please. We do have this listed as a upcoming webinar. We're going to talk about our new EMS training classes. We're going to be doing that on November 12th. And if you're interested in that one, go up to our website and you'll find the registration links. And the next slide, please, Frank. We have a raft of new courses that are coming out. We've already had the inaugural, I can't talk this morning, the inaugural launch of our MIM class, but the MIM Expert class is coming up November 17th. MIM Foundation is on December 8th, and we are launching our Enterprise Mobility Suite class on the 14th of December, our new 8630 class. And then our MIM Advanced Consultant class is going to be launched for the first time January 12th of next year. So a lot of different courses. You can find those listed on our website. We've been putting a lot of effort and work into this. I will say from the past history, we are pretty much the worldwide provider of FIM training, and now we're segueing into the MIM environment as well. So you can expect high quality, lots of access to the instructor, and a good experience overall. And Frank, if you go to the next slide. And this is where I am going to turn it over to Frank. As promised, we are going to be talking about the 3 key features of Azure Active Directory and Enterprise Mobility Suite, and very much in the context of hybrid environments as well. So Frank, take it away.
Great, thank you, Steve. Thanks for the great introduction there. Yes, so what we're going to cover today, we try to come up with a really sexy marketing-looking title for our presentation. And if we really tried to cover, what was, the most important things to your business, we'd really need to know about your business and have a fairly individual discussion. And as much as we'd love to do that with you in the future, we're going to try and focus on things here that we find really cross, all the different customers we talk to. So there's certain key features of Azure Active Directory, and to a smaller extent, Enterprise Mobility Suite that everyone has an interest in, and they seem to be the most kind of often asked about features and then technologies. And we're going to go through here, and what you're going to see is that the slides are really going to follow this outline here. We're going to talk about the fact that, what is a directory other than a place to interact with applications, right? So every directory out there is to allow you to authenticate to some sort of service, and we'll talk about the different ways you can do that in a single sign-on environment for all different kinds of applications, whether they're your apps or hosted apps or things in between. We'll go into some details on those. The other thing that really brings people to the table and gets them really interested are some of the user self-service features, things around password reset and group management. We'll talk in kind of a high level on those. We'll go through, show you some screenshots and actually do some demos. Then we'll talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication. This is something that really brings us to the table with a lot of accounts to where they say, well, we already have, things that we feel pretty comfortable with around authentication, authorization, and such, but we'd really like to add that next level of authentication technologies with multi-factor. And we'll talk about how you can leverage that both for things you're doing in the cloud and also how you can bring that down on-prem to secure some of your on-premise stuff. So before we jump into each item, what I'm going to do to kind of address questions and such is at the end of each of these major 3 sections, we have an area for questions. If something happens where you just really you have something coming up, throw it in the chat window. Steve is going to be here with us, and he'll kind of, if there's some things he can field, he may just respond to them right there. Otherwise, we'll kind of pick them up as we kind of complete each kind of topic area. So with those ground rules, we'll go ahead and we'll jump into, again, following in this exact order. So the first section we're going to talk about here is SSO for applications. And I put here, all of your applications, your internal and external. There's a lot of new players out there that are offering some really good capabilities around SSO, and they really seem to have kind of captured the the online or the external cases. But keeping in mind that anyone with any kind of substantial on-premise kind of infrastructure is really going to need a solution that supports all your applications and everywhere they're at. And we think Microsoft is really kind of hit this right where they need to. So the first kind of type or style of application we're going to talk about, and this is kind of focused towards some of the folks out there who are at the maturity level where they're developing their own applications. And we're going to call these line of business applications. These are applications that your internal developers are creating to support your own company's needs. So how can Azure Active Directory kind of add value there? Well, when we look at the ability to add applications that leverage Azure Active Directory, when I add a new app, the first thing it says is, what kind of app is this? Is it something I'm developing? And we kind of put a little screenshot that you'll see there on the side. Applications my organization is developing, and that's what we consider to be those line of business applications. Or is this an application coming out of our application gallery? And by application gallery, we mean Microsoft pre-configured software as a service applications that your organization is probably already using or is thinking about using. Those would be, things like hosted applications such as ServiceNow, Salesforce, Box, and any number of other applications. In fact, we'll actually get into some of those numbers kind of as we go along. And then we have a third option to actually take your internal applications that you're running and securely publish them out to the web very, very quickly and easily. So again, we'll talk about all 3 of those, starting with line of business applications. And so by line of business applications, they have a pretty good coverage here. We're talking about both web applications that use kind of well-established federation protocols like WS Federation, SAML, and the other well-known standards-based methods. Also desktop applications, as well as other kind of device-centric. So these are applications that would run on your desktop, your tablet, your mobile phone, using newer technologies such as OAuth and the ability to have those applications interact with these new advanced authentication methods. And then also another technology that Microsoft has added into their Azure Active Directory platform known as Graph, a Graph API. And what that does is it allows a REST-based API access to Azure Active Directory. And not only in the way you normally think of signing on to an application, but actually being able to interact with the directory. So do things like actually create objects, update objects, and interact in advanced sorts of ways. Now, of course, there's a kind of a full security model around this, so that that only applications that are given proper permissions are able to do these sort of things. But it really opens up a kind of experience for developers that lets them do some really advanced things. And then so this is really, again, line of business applications that are ones that our internal folks are developing for us. Some really nice things on here. The tools and technologies are very well documented. There are samples not only for web applications done in all sorts of development environments, not just Microsoft ones. So if you're using things like Node.js, JavaScript, PHP, there's example encodes for all of those, as well as if you're developing directly on platforms like iOS, Android, or Microsoft Desktop, there's sample apps and resources for that. Also keep in mind that all of these things are also available both licensed without licensing cost, as well as actually being open source. You can actually go up to GitHub and if you're so inclined and have the kind of the developer chops, you can actually develop extensions and actually contribute to the projects themselves. So when we hear about Microsoft developing, open source products for other platforms other than Windows, we can really see that there's a fundamental shift in kind of their thinking. So, and I would say definitely in a positive direction. So that's really what we're going to say about developing your own applications for Azure Active Directory. The more common use cases are actually using applications that already exist out there, right? When you look at, the number of services that are available that you can purchase as a service, the number of screenshots we need to get all the little cute logos of these companies, it would just be, fairly overwhelming. And we'll talk about what some of those numbers look like. So Microsoft has basically gone in and figured out all the work it takes to integrate with all of these applications so that you don't have to. So the old days of having to do complex integrations with these SaaS vendors has now gotten down to essentially picking them off of a list. So now you're able to browse through their gallery of over 2,400 applications and simply say, I would like to use Azure Active Directory as the authentication for this application. So some of the numbers that are out there. So there's different ways that Azure Active Directory can integrate with applications. It can do fairly simple technology such as password vaulting, which is basically storing your credentials within the directory and replaying them as you log into these different applications. As you can see, this is kind of the lion's share of ones that are out there. And then when we kind of, as I like to call it, move up the food chain, we have ones where we can do actual real federation and single sign-on with applications, about 150 plus currently. And then also, the last two items actually show that not only can we single sign-on into selected applications, we can even do what we call outbound user provisioning, which means we're not just signing into it, but we're actually creating identities in those SaaS applications. And so when we think about password-based SSO or password vaulting, what's some of the value that folks see with that? perfect example, this is actually a really common use case, are social things such as Facebook and Twitter, where we want people, let's say in our marketing department, to be able to use these things on behalf of our company, but we may not necessarily want them to have access to the actual logon accounts. So how can Azure Active Directory help with this? Well, it can actually store the credentials for our, let's say, corporate Twitter account and allow people with the appropriate access to sign on using their Azure Active Directory account and then be able to interact with those services while they never actually require access to the actual account that's in Twitter or Facebook itself. Also really nice when people change jobs, change responsibilities, maybe leave the company, that they don't leave with knowledge of the underlying account. They only have ever logged into it with their Azure AD account, which we can easily manage and deprovision centrally. So we don't have to go to all these applications and figure out what did they have access to, how do I turn them off, let everyone else know the new password, so on and so forth. So it's a way of kind of managing shared access to these services. In addition, there's a new feature that actually lets you periodically change the password of the system without individuals actually knowing what those passwords are. Only Azure Active Directory has to know. And there's a couple of screenshots that we sprinkled here along the bottom of the show, kind of what some of these things look like in the actual web admin console. So that's a password SSO, and then some places that even that simple technology can kind of add value for you. Now the next one is where we're actually doing real federated single sign-on. And this is where Azure Active Directory is the identity provider in the single sign-on game, so to speak. Also, there's a list here, and you can use your favorite search engine to find it as well, that shows a list of applications that support this single sign-on integration. And obviously that list is growing every day. This more advanced sort of integration with more of the real true business-oriented applications. While a lot of the other password vault applications are what I call consumer grade, they may be some of your loyalty sites for airlines and hotels and those sort of things. When you get into the real business applications, you start to see more of these true single sign-on capabilities. And I've also sprinkled in a couple screenshots of what it looks like to configure systems where we're able to not only single sign-on into them, but actually create new identities into the system. So we're essentially doing provisioning into these SaaS applications. Now, obviously, the ability to do that is dependent on these applications providing interfaces to do that. But where they do, Microsoft has pre-done the integrations for you. So the days of spending hours and maybe even a week trying to integrate with the SaaS application is pretty much history now. At this point, it's just a matter of me saying, I want to use the app. Azure knows how to interface with it. I'm now ready to use it. So the provisioning kind of lead time for bringing new SaaS applications online has been drastically reduced using Azure Active Directory. So this section we just covered here really kind of covers all those pre-configured SaaS applications that many times you're already using, in many cases, whether you necessarily know it or not. The third classification of application we're going to talk about are these apps that you currently have deployed internally, maybe things such as SharePoint, OWA, corporate websites, departmental websites. A lot of these are also using integrated Windows authentication currently as their authentication method, which works really, really well for the people with their domain joined desktops at their desk. But we want to be able to give access to these applications when you're other places than your desk. And if you're a typical worker, and especially in my case, I am very seldom actually sitting in a corporate office somewhere. I'm out doing my job in any number of places, both mobile and fixed at, for example, customer sites. So Azure Active Directory provides a capability for publishing your internal applications and still being able to leverage the authentication methods that you have now without having to change up these applications to use them in new places. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. So the technology and the product feature set that makes this possible is called Azure Active Directory Application Proxy. So the best way to describe it is what we call remote access as a service. So it's the idea that the publishing of on-prem applications that used to involve things like installing reverse proxies, installing maybe federation servers, opening firewall ports, these sort of things, which typically were fairly long lead time and required, help from networking and other type teams, is now something that you can much more easily do yourself. And then kind of the second point is now we can actually use these cloud identities to control access to applications, not just in the cloud, but applications actually running on-premise, and cover the use cases of accessing them not only internally, but also externally as well, all with that single Azure AD login. So let's dive a little more into that. This is a really exciting technology that really lessens the time it takes to do that. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into it. So the architecture diagram on the right side shows that what we're doing is on our internal network, we're deploying these connector agents. And what they do is they check into this cloud-hosted application proxy. And they basically form a channel that allows the application proxy running in Microsoft Azure data centers to access the behind-the-scenes applications that are running inside of your corporate network. And we'll talk a little bit about the fact that these arrows are actually pointing upwards, going from your corporate network up into the cloud, as opposed to the direction you might think of them as going the other direction. And then we're also showing, a variety of devices that are accessing this. And the key thing when you look at the traffic flow coming from those devices, that the initial connection is between the devices and the proxies in the Azure data center. And so why is that important? Well, the first point says that all of your inbound traffic hits the cloud. So, what I like to call all the junk, all the denial of services, all of the, people poking around your website to see if they can, get to your applications, all get really kind of shunted off at the cloud, and they don't show up at your doorstep, right? So anything that hasn't been authenticated through an Azure Active Directory login never shows up at your doorstep. It all gets kind of blocked and filtered up in the cloud for you. The third point, which kind of gets to the arrows I talked about, is the connectors actually form what I like to call a back channel to allow that application proxy to talk to your servers by means of outbound connections. So you don't actually need to open inbound firewall ports for that communication between the on-prem connectors and the proxy in the cloud. So that's one thing that makes this kind of a quicker time to value solution, is that you don't have to go through the typical dance of getting a lot of that stuff configured at the network level. The fourth point, which is really important, is all the components, both the cloud and the ones that are on-prem, are continuously updated. So if there's known vulnerabilities or things that need to be corrected, you're always on the latest version without having to think about doing it yourself. And the last point is that in the same way you access all the other application types we talked about, since they're all managed with a central account, we can take advantage of things like login anomaly detection, reporting, and auditing all at a single point. So no matter what your application is, no matter where you're accessing it, you have a central administration point for not only control of the account, but things like logging and associated things that are really important to you. Some other recent advancements are the capability, and we won't go through all the details here, but the ability to sign on with a cloud identity but access back-end applications that use integrated Windows authentication. And the kind of the secret sauce to make all this work is the fact that the connectors that are running on-prem are able to essentially proxy a security or a Kerberos ticket on your behalf. So the back-end applications don't know that you're coming in from the cloud. They just see that you have a Windows AD security token that the connector has gone and got from you. So what's really nice about this are the last 3 points. You don't need to change your existing integrated Windows auth applications to publish and use them with cloud identities. So no need to install agents, no need to make any changes to the apps themselves. They keep working the way they do today. And again, the last point on there, it's what we talked about before. People aren't directly connecting to your app. They're going through the Microsoft cloud proxy servers, where essentially a lot of the trash gets thrown away, and you only get authenticated, authorized traffic going to your applications. So if nothing else, it just reduces the amount of traffic your inbound internet connections have to kind of stand up to. And then a very recent capability is the ability that when you host these applications, you can host them using the same name you do internally as well as externally. So it does require you to upload a SSL certificate that covers the apps that you are publishing this way. But once you do that, it allows you to use the same URL, internal and external. So when you send an email out that says, click on intranet.mycompany.com, it works no matter where you're at. So very, very nice. So we covered kind of the 3 main kind of modes of applications you can protect with Azure Active Directory. Your apps you're developing, apps that are available as a service, as well as all of your internal apps. So we really think we have a good story around all of your apps accessed anywhere. So I'm going to kind of take a quick breath. If there's any questions on this, go ahead and throw them up in the window. If not, I'm going to go ahead and start queuing up the next section where we're going to talk about self-service.
So far, Frank, I'm not seeing any questions, but let's pause just for a moment. If people do have questions, now's the time to post them.
Okay, great. Okay, we'll start moving, and if something pops up, we'll address it as it comes up. So the next kind of major, kind of area 2 of 3 here is around user self-service. So we think of, things like group management self-service, password management self-service as being the kind of things that we would have to deploy a rather sometimes involved on-premise identity management solution. And we know that those solutions are never, the weekend projects, right? They're usually involved, pretty involved in both the aspects of time and money. So now we're looking at the ability to offer these same services as a service in the cloud. So let's talk about what some of these are and what they're going to get for you. We're going to start out with group management first. So what can we do with Azure around group management? And remember, I said we're talking about identity kind of management as a service. So even though Azure first kind of started out as a cloud directory, as these services are beginning to be added, all these self-service features, we're actually going from just a cloud directory to an actual identity management system that's hosted in the cloud. It's going to let you get all those identity management features and capabilities, but you're just going to be able to get to them much, much faster. So let's talk a little bit, what is this self-service group management about? So this is the ability to kind of manage the day-to-day control of membership of groups, and more importantly, delegate that out to the people in the business who really understand what we call the context for the membership. So the features, like I say, we include, this is management for security groups. This is not really around distribution group management. There's other capabilities for that. And the whole idea of people being able to make requests and people being able to approve them. And then we'll talk a little bit about, well, what can we do with those groups? And we're going to tie that back to that kind of application story that we just told before. And for me personally, having, sat on both ends of the help desk as well as different jobs in IT, most importantly, take IT out of the approval path, right? Because how many times do you get a call that says, I need access to this group, and then your help desk guy has to figure out who it is, and he sends them an email, and They don't get back to them, and then the user's asking, well, where's it at? When's it going to be done? And then you got it. So essentially your IT people, especially your help desk, really you just sit there and they're passing messages between the person who wants the access and the person who really knows whether or not that's appropriate. So we're going to take you guys out of the middle and then just let these transactions transpire between the people with the need and the people with the approval, and put tools in their hands. So I've kind of thrown up a screenshot here. When you're working through the Azure kind of user portal, and we won't have time to go into detail about it, but it's an area that lets you interact with applications, groups, approvals, and such. In this case, we actually have someone who's gone to the portal. We see a list of groups that are out there. So I can view that kind of different angles, but in this case, I'm just looking at these security groups. Then what I can do is within the user interface, I can click on the bottom of the little tile that represents the group and actually make a request to join that group. Once that's been done, emails go out to people who are designated as owners of those groups, letting them know that there's a request for someone to join the group. That person would then go into the Azure portal. They'd see a list of the outstanding requests, and they can do the approvals and denies as appropriate. So they can click the ones they want to deny, click the ones they want to approve, and at that point, the appropriate membership is either granted or not granted. So it's pretty much exactly what you think it would be. You know, users make approvals, owners make decisions, people get access, they don't get access. So again, similar to what you'd see with an on-prem system, keeping in mind that this is, you know, kind of a much simpler version. It doesn't have all the nuances and complexity that a full IDM project would have, but it certainly doesn't have the lead time and cost that one would have as well. So for many people, this is all they need, and they're really happy with this self-service feature.
So Frank,
another thing.
Question, if you don't mind me interrupting. So if I'm running SharePoint on Office 365, can I use this to manage security groups on that SharePoint site?
Yes, you can manage any of the security groups that are out there. And we won't go into too much detail about this, but there are some capabilities to configure synchronization both to and from your on-premise Active Directory. So you can choose to manage groups that only exist in the cloud or groups that exist in both. So yes, this is a potential administration point for not only that use case, but many others as well.
Great.
Did we cover that one?
Yep.
Very good, thank you. Okay, another one, this really doesn't fall within self-service, but it's so cool, I just had to throw it up here. These are what we call dynamic security groups. And this is where membership in the group isn't based on a request or approval, it's based on some factual information about a person. So in this case, I've come up with a group called marketing, and I've defined that this is a dynamic membership based on user attributes such as their department or their job title. So when people's job titles are changed so that they fall within the scope of this rule or fall out of the scope of this rule, they join or leave the group as appropriate. So it's a way to keep groups automatically updated based on factual information. So these are really great for your, you know, kind of departmental security groups, maybe location-based security groups. So that really helps out here, taking care of those. Now, similar capabilities exist for your distribution groups for people who are using tools like Exchange Online, where they have the capability to do similar things, but within their configuration. So, but remember, their configuration is really around distribution groups. This fills in the gap for giving those same capabilities for security groups. So once you're a member of the group, well, what are some interesting things we can do with that? Well, one is we can assign access to these applications, right? All sorts of applications, you know, the SaaS apps, the internal apps, the apps you're developing. We can use those groups to decide whether or not you have access to them. And by having access to them, they'll actually appear on that user portal as well. So by having certain group memberships, either by the fact that I've been approved or by the fact that I use these dynamic groups, I can then get access to applications and make them available in an easy way for users to see what's available to them. So that's one popular way to leverage these groups that we've created. So for self-service group management, I know other than Steve's question there, do we have any other questions before we jump into password self-service? Okay, good. And we're going to continue to move at kind of an appropriate pace so we can have a little time at the end for questions in general as well. Self-service password management. This has to be the most asked about feature when people are talking about Azure. It's kind of like this universal use case that everybody has a need for, but a lot of folks don't want to deploy the on-premise infrastructure to get that capability. So the ability to use it as a service is pretty powerful. It lets people leverage this capability very, very quickly and easily. So it actually brings up a lot of different scenarios where you can use this capability. And we'll talk lightly about these. And the first one is we have some users, a very small number of users, who only have identities in the cloud. And these are typically, your really small businesses. If I were to start a company with 5 of my buddies, we probably do everything in the cloud. And our identities would only exist in the cloud, and we could do password reset for them in the cloud. Now, when we talk about hybrid, and by hybrid we mean people who are integrating both on-premise Active Directory and cloud Active Directory, where we're actually synchronizing accounts between the two. In both cases, both when we use kind of federation or password synchronization, we're able to leverage with the password write-back feature, the ability to change our password in the cloud, have that same password be reflected on-prem as well. So it covers all the scenarios, whether you're using ADFS for federation, whether you're doing password synchronization, it works in all of these cases. So there really isn't any, what I call, holes in the kind of solution. And so some of the password scenarios that it allows, we have password change. So a user who simply wants to change their password, they haven't forgotten it, they just want to change it, they can do that from the Azure user interface, and that will propagate both between the cloud and on-prem. Administrator-initiated password reset. That's where someone who's an administrator of Azure Active Directory can go in and say, I want to reset this person's password, and that's supported. And then the one we're going to talk more about is this user-initiated password reset, where I'm the user, I forgot my password, I need to recover my password. And we'll go through in some of these screens, show you what that looks like, and talk about how people get registered to do this. Because in order to use a password reset solution, we will have to register some sort of information. The most popular one out there is a multi-factor phone-based, where you respond to a text message, a phone message. In addition, you can also do a question and answer. You can choose security questions that people have to register answers for, and then if they're able to replay those, then we accept that as proof of them being who they say they are. So the question is, how do we get all this data into Azure Active Directory? Well, a couple different ways. Users, administrators, one, can go through the Azure or the Office 365 management portals and set those values. Better solutions are using synchronization tools to sync that from your on-prem AD and push them up to the cloud. You can use PowerShell. Also, you can set various capabilities for users to self-register. You can give them links to take them there, or you can even, in the last case, before they can use that user portal, they'll get a pop-up that says, okay, go ahead and register your password reset information before we let you into the portal the first time, as well as the ability to periodically require people to recertify that. Perhaps you can say every 6 months, I'd like them, when they log in, to let me know that their phone or other information is still current. So those are some ways you can have them keep that information up to date. Also, we talked about the key to making all this work is the ability to do password write back. That's the ability to write a password change in the cloud and push it back on-prem. Without going into a lot of details, it really covers all the different scenarios. Whether you're using password synchronization, whether you're using ADFS, it covers both scenarios. In addition, any of the password changes that go back on-prem the complexity requirements and rules are still applicable. So if you have rules around minimum aging or minimum length or such things, that new password has to meet all of those requirements. Additionally, some really nice things here. This doesn't require new inbound firewall rules. That was similar to some of the other things we saw before. You can also reset locked out accounts. And coming soon, there'll be a preview of the ability to unlock accounts without actually changing their passwords, which is important in some scenarios. And plus, just like we talked about, since you're using this Azure kind of integrated identity management system, reporting to track things such as who's registering, who's resetting, all kind of within that single cloud identity. So what I'm going to do is a really quick demo here. So what I'm going to show is a resetting a password. And I actually literally had to do this because my password expired last week, and I had to go in and do this. So I'm going to do a quick switch here. Let's see, I may need to temporarily kind of pause the presentation. And what I'm going to do is I am going to go and access the user portal. So this is at the URL myapps.microsoft.com. And so I'm presented with an Azure Active Directory login. In this case, I actually have both Microsoft and Azure AD accounts with the same name. So I'm sitting here at the login page, and I'm not really sure about this password. Well, I use this link here below that says, can't access your account. And this takes me to the self-service password reset process. Okay, the first thing it does is verifies that I'm actually a person and not some automated process. I find these things a little challenging sometimes, so I'll cycle through a couple of them so I can read. Okay, so I'll basically solve a little CAPTCHA. Once I'm able to successfully do that, I then have to prove my identity with one of the configured multi-factor. And in my case, I configured 3 different options. And actually, what you see here is an alternate email, a text to my mobile phone, or a call to my mobile phone. Since I'm actually talking on that phone, I am going to, first of all, trust that you won't all call me after this meeting. But unless you have work for us to do, in which case, feel free to call. So I'm going to send a text, and momentarily I should be seeing a text message pop up on my screen. And there it is. Go ahead and enter the number that's been texted to me. And provided I've entered it correctly, which I'm pretty sure I did, I'll be able to choose a new password. And enter the information it wants. And provide this password meet for it password policies. It'll go ahead and change my password and let me know. Okay, so in this case, it says my password's been reset. And then I can just simply click back here to continue on with what I was doing. One of the other things is I look at my phone. I've just received an email that says, your password has been changed. If this was you, then that's fine. If that wasn't you, please let someone know. So it gives feedback to the user knowing that that's been changed. So now I'll actually sign in with my updated password, and then it's going to take me to my personal page, and I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So I'm running the webinar on the same connection, so it's a little bit slow. Okay, so that's kind of what the end user process looks like for doing self-service password reset. There's a whole bunch of things on the back end that administrators configure to allow or disallow certain features, and we know that would actually be something good for a future presentation. And we'll come back to that. Okay, so Let me continue with the presentation. And so essentially that is self-service password reset, and the second of our kind of self-service features that we're kind of demonstrating. There actually are other self-service kind of things that we may get into in further things. So a quick pause here before we jump really quickly into the last section around questions around any of the self-service features that we just demonstrated. Going once, going twice.
Pretty quiet group this morning.
Yeah, I think I'm doing such a great job of presenting that there's no room for questions.
Actually, yeah, there may be one there. I'm having trouble seeing it on my screen. Do you see it on yours, Frank?
Let me scroll.
There is one in the question. Assuming when you registered for the SSPR, you provided the known TXL number?
Yeah, so what happened on that page is I had to register that number, and if you looked at the user interface, it actually kind of put a little asterisk for everything except the last two numbers. So in my case, it said, okay, we're going to text it to a phone number that ends in 86. And I'm going, oh, I know that. That's my cell phone number. And it required me to enter the full phone number to prove that that's really me. Otherwise, if you didn't have to enter that number, what would prevent, some joker from going on there and, requesting to do request your number, and your phone just keeps going off and off and off and off. So it's a way to prevent kind of, I wouldn't necessarily call it denial of service, but more just kind of, denial of sleep type attack, where, someone can go in there and do that over and over. And so you actually have to give some information so that they know it's pretty likely you. And interestingly, I did not see that in the window, so I don't know if mine's just a little off. Okay, well, Steve sees more, he'll let me know. So the next section, which we're going to cover pretty quickly, I only have a few slides, is multi-factor authentication. And we're going to cover two kind of variations. One is multi-factor for the cloud, and the other is multi-factor on-prem. We'll kind of talk about
Rep Frank, but we got another question that just popped up. Would that password reset also be synced with your on-prem AD user account?
Yes, it's configurable whether you want to do it or not. In most cases, you do want to do it because you want your password in the cloud to be the same as your password on-prem. So when I did that, the first thing it did was attempted to change my on-prem password. If that was successful, it also changed my cloud password. If either of them fails, both of them fail. So you don't get into this situation where one is changed but not the other. It's an all or nothing transactional type operation.
Great. I hope that answers the question. We can always go back to it later.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'm not seeing the questions, so please throw them up there when you see them. So what are some of the scenarios that we can use multi-factor for, especially when we talk about cloud versus on-prem? So the question is, what are you trying to secure? So if you're trying to work with Microsoft applications, then you can use both the cloud-based multi-factor or the on-prem multi-factor with federation servers such as ADFS. So, in either scenario, we can do multi-factor. Similarly, if you're doing applications that are either in the app gallery or applications that are published, it says CWAP, that's the Cloud Web Application Proxy we talked about earlier. Any of the applications that you protect using those methods, you can use the cloud flavor of multi-factor or the on-prem version. But if you're trying to publish things like internal applications that you do through your internal proxy server, not the cloud-based one, or if you're trying to protect systems such as VPN or remote desktop or other things that you can secure with technologies like LDAP or Radius, you would use the on-premise authentication server for that. So a lot of folks may want to use multi-factor with their existing VPN solution. So that's where the on-premise kind of version of multi-factor comes into play. But if you're doing things that are out on the web or published to the web using Azure technologies, then you can just use kind of the out-of-the-box cloud. If you want to do these more advanced on-prem scenarios, you actually have to deploy essentially a server or agent on your internal network in order to link those together. Another kind of quick thing about multi-factor is that's a common point of confusion when I talk to people about it, is the fact that multi-factor is always a second factor. So the solution doesn't support where it's the only login. For example, you can't say, well, I want to connect via VPN with a username and a voice call, or you'll always have your primary method of authentication, and that's in many cases an Azure AD login or a Windows Active Directory login, and then the multi-factor just comes along behind that as an additional step that needs to be completed. So it works really well with systems that currently ask for your username and password, because once we see that, we simply just jump in the middle, make them jump through the little multi-factor hoops, and then let them go on their way to the application. Also really nice because it's transparent, that people who are attackers don't know that a multi-factor is in play. Plus, with an interesting capability for users to say, I did not request this authentication when they're prompted, it lets your security folks identify actual attacks versus just people forgetting their passwords. Because a lot of times it's kind of hard to tell the difference. Kind of incompetence and deliberate attacks sometimes kind of look very similar. And again, this is just kind of another way of kind of looking at that same thing. Where are the users? What are they authenticating with? What solution do you put in place? So as you can see, most of them involve the ability to use cloud only. Only some of the on-premise only scenarios require the on-premise server. Also, interestingly, a number of features that are available in Azure Premium, which is a paid offering, are also available in limited versions with Office 365. So, for example, this multi-factor capability, as well as some mobile device management capability, they essentially give you a light version, as I like to call it, included with Office 365. However, if you want a fuller feature set to cover more advanced use cases, you can always buy the premium offering. So what we're showing here is that in all cases, whether you're using multi-factor that's bundled with Office 365, whether you're doing multi-factor for your Azure administrators, or if you actually purchase Azure multi-factor for your users, all of the multi-factor protection, mobile app, phone calls, SMS, and app passwords are supported in all three cases. The kind of use cases where you'd actually purchase the Azure AD Premium is to really get into a lot of the more advanced configurations. So, for example, the phone call or text message that I get, if I want that to come from, for example, my help desk phone number or some other well-known phone number, that would be a feature with the Premium. Maybe I want to replace the default voice greetings with a customized message. These are all sorts of things that the more advanced paid feature kind of offers. So that was really quick through there. There's some other features that kind of had in here as additional stuff if we had time that aren't really related to those three major concepts, and given kind of time constraints, we'll won't be able to go in depth on those. When we talk about other features, one, we're talking about when you look at these numbers, and this is kind of marketing stuff, right? Big numbers mean it's really good. The key thing here is it's a cloud scale. In other words, it's is as big as it gets. Major numbers of organizations, users, and authentications, applications. So what they're saying is, they're running a really big system with a lot of really smart people 24/7. Kind of compare that to the resources that you can probably devote to identity management, and you can see that they've kind of covered that pretty well. We talked a little bit, and won't go into it, about the idea of synchronization and federation, that we can support using users and their passwords in the cloud, or just users and then federating their passwords So there's details and nuances why one might be better than the other, and which I've actually done a whole webinar just on that subject. So we'll say that you have options, and that's there. The latest technology is called Azure Active Directory Connect, and it supports all of the things that essentially glue your on-prem and your cloud directory together. And then we also kind of touched on this really lightly. Because you're using one directory to do all these things, you get really nice integrated reporting. And these are things such as anomalous sign-ins, unusual actions that may prompt you to look closer into user activity. Applications that we've configured, no matter what kind of apps they are, we can get usage data, the number of people using them, the times that they're using them, so on and so forth. And even the ability here with some of these user reports to actually see where are people signing on from, what device are they signing on from, when are they signing in. And that's really the end of the kind of the prepared comments that we had. If there's additional questions, we've only got a very small handful of minutes, but we want to try to get them in before we let Steve kind of wrap it up and call things done for us. So, Steve, are you seeing any other questions, since I don't seem to be seeing them here?
I am not seeing any other questions at this point, but we will wait for any additional questions. I will mention that some of the presentations that Frank mentioned are available. If you go onto our website, you'll find the recorded versions of them.
Yeah, in addition, if there were any, perhaps some of the URLs that were on there, if you want to see, this will be available pretty shortly, so you can go back and peruse some of that content as you have time.
There is a question. SSPR plus ADFS with write-back, how does that actually work?
So what happens when a password change comes into Azure Active Directory? The actual tool that does that is that Azure AD Connect. In fact, I'll back up a slide or two here and see if we can get to it. So the actual password write-back is done through the synchronization tool. So regardless of whether your password is synchronized or whether it's federated, it works in both cases. What actually happens is there's a listener on your on-premise Azure AD Connect that is connecting to essentially a message queue where password change events are indicated. So the on-premise tool picks those up, and there's all the expected encryption and security around that password, pulls that back on-prem, and then the Azure AD Connect tool changes the password on-prem.
Okay. Is there a minimum Active Directory function level for any of these services?
That 2003 level, so it's pretty basic. Now, in some of the more advanced scenarios, like devices and some of the other advanced ones, there are some schema extensions that may need to occur for some of those. When you install the Azure AD Connect tool, it will let you know if those are required, and you can choose to approve those prior to actually doing it.
Great. And let's see if there's any more there. I think we've not seeing any more questions. We're coming up on the top of the hour, so if you have any more, you need to post those questions now.